Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I welcome each one of you to this. It's hot outside, but to this wonderful session, which we are going to witness in a short time. We are here in the inaugural function of the English Literary Association of Shri Bhinsani City College. And we have got the head of the Department of English with us, as well as we have got Professor from the Marathi Department, Dr. Rajendra Naikwade, sir, a senior professor. And I'll very shortly tell you why he is there in the English Literary Association inaugural session. At the outset, I request Dr. Anil Shende, sir, who is the head of the Department of English, to forward the introductory remarks. Sir.
Thank you, madam. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you're audible now.
Thank you, madam. Respected guest speaker of today's function, Professor Udgirkar, madam, my faculties, Dr. Pranjali Kane, madam, Madam Amrapali Modak, Madam Harsha Shende, and dear students. We gather over here today for the inauguration of the English Literary Association of our college. And I can say that this movement will the beginning of a journey through the realms of literature, language, and the boundless imagination that words can offer. So in the world of literature, we find a profound connection to the human experience. It is a treasure of diverse stories, voices, perspectives that not only entertain but also enlighten. Through this association, we aim to grow a community of readers, writers, and enthusiasts who appreciate the beauty of the written word. So our mission is to celebrate the richness of the English language, explore its history, and promote a deep appreciation for the classics while embracing the contemporary. We shall delve into works of renowned authors and poets, dissect their words, and unravel the layers of the meaning that lie beneath. Let us remember that literature is a powerful tool. It can challenge, provoke, and inspire. It has the ability to bridge divides, foster empathy, and ignite discussions on the critical issues of our time. This association will be a platform where these conversations can flourish. I encourage each of you to actively engage in our literary, whether it's through discussions, creative writing, writing workshops, or cultural events. Let us explore, learn, and grow together. Your ideas and passion will be the driving force behind the success of this association. I would like to express my gratitude to all of you who joined us today and for your commitment to the world of English literature. Together, we shall embark on a journey that will not enrich our minds, but also deepen our understanding to the human spirit. Students, today we have decided to talk on American literature. So for the students' sake, I would like to tell the salient features of the American literature. American literature reflects the multicultural nature of the United States with works from various ethnic, racial, and cultural backgrounds. Many American authors draw on specific regions for inspiring, creating distinct regional literature like Southern Gothic or New England and Transcendentalism. American literature often explores themes of identity, including individualism, immigration, and the American dream. Many American authors use their works to comment on social and political issues such as slavery, civil rights, and gender equality. American literature has a strong tradition of realist and naturalist writing, focusing on everyday life and impact of environment and heredity on characters. So authors often incorporate regional dialects and colloquial language to create authentic voices and settings. American literature frequently celebrates the natural world and the frontier spirit, exemplified in works like those of Thoreau and Whitman. So it uses symbolism and myths to explore the American experience, like the symbolism in works of Hawthorne. American writers have a history of experimenting with literary form and style, from Walt Whitman free verse to postmodern deconstruction. American literature has a global impact, with writers like Hemingway and Faulkner contributing to the development of modern literature. So these are the excellent features, we can say all that. So dear friends and students, I would like to welcome on behalf of the Department of English, Madam Professor Girkar, and I stop here for my introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Thank you, madam.
Thank you so very
I would also like to add the department runs a life skill cell under which we had conducted a 1-week anchoring workshop. I request Dr. Rajendra Naikwade, sir, he's a professor from the Department of Marathi, to announce the winners of the script writing competition that he had conducted during that anchoring workshop. And let me add over here, I'm very happy to announce that he has sponsored the prizes also. So I request Naikwade, sir, to say a few words and announce the prize winners.
नमस्कार.
Namaskar, sir.
आवाज येतोय मॅडम?
हो, sir. Please go ahead.
आपल्या आजच्या या आभासी पद्धतीने होणाऱ्या इंग्रजी अभ्यास मंडळाच्या उद्घाटन कार्यक्रमामध्ये उपस्थित असलेल्या VMB महाविद्यालयाच्या प्रमुख वक्ता डॉक्टर सविता देवगिरकर मॅडम, आमचे सन्मित्र इंग्रजी विभागाचे प्रमुख डॉक्टर अनिल शेंडे सर, ज्यांनी आज या ठिकाणी प्रास्ताविक करून या सगळ्या उपक्रमाचं महत्त्व आपल्याला समजावून सांगितलं. आमच्या महाविद्यालयाचं एक चैतन्य असणाऱ्या आणि उपक्रमशील व्यक्तिमत्वाच्या आमच्या डॉक्टर प्रांजली काने मॅडम, ज्या अँकरिंग कार्यशाळेच्या संयोजक सुद्धा होत्या. असे अनेक उपक्रम त्या करत असतात. आणि प्रिय विद्यार्थी मित्र हो, आपण इंग्रजी विभागाच्या जरी याच्यासाठी असलो तरी मला मॅडमनी या ठिकाणी संधी दिली, कारण अँकरिंग वर्कशॉप मध्ये निवेदनाची काव्यमय सूत्रे या विषयावर मी एक विषय मांडला होता. आणि ती अँकरिंगची कार्यशाळा झाली होती, ती आपली जवळपास 7 दिवस झाली होती. त्याच्यामध्ये विविध लोकांनी विविध विषय मांडले होते. त्याच्यामध्ये एक मुलांना एक टास्क आपण दिला होता, एक स्वाध्याय गृहपाठ दिला होता आणि त्याच्यामध्ये त्यांनी एक स्क्रिप्ट लिहायचं होतं. त्याची बक्षिसं मी या ठिकाणी घोषित करणार आहे. त्याच्यात आपण विषय दिला होता की महाविद्यालयाचा कॉलेज डे किंवा स्नेहसंमेलन जे असतं, त्या स्नेहसंमेलनाच्या निवेदनाची स्क्रिप्ट त्यांनी तयार करायची होती, संहिता तयार करायची होती. आणि जवळपास 10 ते 15 विद्यार्थ्यांनी त्या स्पर्धेमध्ये भाग घेतला होता. आणि त्याच्यामध्ये जे क्रमांक मिळाले होते ते क्रमांक या ठिकाणी मी घोषित करतो. त्याच्यामध्ये 3रा क्रमांक मिळाला होता, तो सीमा धुर्वे BA भाग 2 या विद्यार्थिनीला मिळालाय. त्याच्यामध्ये 2य क्रमांक मिळालेला आहे तो सायली टेकाडे BA भाग 2 या विद्यार्थिनीला. आणि या स्पर्धेमध्ये म्हणजे या संहिता लेखनाची एक छोटी स्पर्धा आपण वर्कशॉपसाठी घेतली होती. त्यामध्ये प्रथम क्रमांक मिळालेला आहे तो निलेश मांदाडे BCom भाग 3 चा विद्यार्थी आहे. तर मला असं वाटतं की मी या सर्व विद्यार्थ्यांची बक्षिसं आपल्याकडे आहेत, त्यांनी ती माझ्याकडून मराठी विभागातून ती घेऊन जावीत. आणि आजच्या या सर्व विद्यार्थ्यांचं मी माझ्यातर्फे अभिनंदन करतो. आपल्या या अभ्यास मंडळाचं जे काही मंडळ निर्माण होईल आणि अभ्यास मंडळाचे जे काही सदस्य असतील म्हणजे इंग्रजी आपल्या विभागाच्या आणि ते वर्षभर जे उपक्रम करतील त्या उपक्रमासाठी मी शुभेच्छा देतो. या संहिता लेखनाच्या स्पर्धेमध्ये ज्यांनी बक्षिसं प्राप्त केली, ज्यांनी सहभाग घेतला त्यांचंही मी अभिनंदन करतो आणि आपल्या सगळ्यांना या कार्यक्रमाला शुभेच्छा देऊन थांबतो. धन्यवाद. नमस्कार.
Thank you so much, sir, for both the things that you have conducted a very nice session in the anchoring workshop and for sponsoring the prizes also. Thank you so much. We move on, dear students. On this occasion, let us all install the office bearers of the English Literary Association. And to do the honors, I request my colleague, Mrs. Harsha Shende, to announce the names of the students. Mrs. Harsha Shende. Harsha ma'am, you are not audible. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. No, ma'am. Now you're visible, but you're not audible. Yeah.
Now?
Yes. Now you can go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are here to announce the new office bearers of English Literary Association. And I have the honor of announcing the new office bearers. So I'm pleased to introduce our new
Ma'am, we cannot hear you properly. Can you please come here? You can join from here.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are here to announce the new office bearers of English Literary Association. I am Harsha Shende, and I have the honor of announcing the new office bearers. Please mute yourself. I am pleased to introduce our new president, Minal Bageshwar, the student of MS second year. The secretary of this session is Meghna Shende, the student of MA first year. The members of this association are Samishna Thande, student of BA second year, student of BA final year, Asta Sontake, student of BA second year, and Khushi Kollarkar, student of BA first year. I want to extend my warm regards and heartiest congratulations to all the office bearers of English Literary Association. I'm sure all the members will fulfill their duties and work in a dedicated manner. Thank you so much. Now I hand over the program to continue to Kane ma'am.
Thank you, Harsha ma'am. Thank you so much. I also expect all the office bearers to work, to dedicate, and make this complete association a success. We have come to the much awaited part of today's program, and that is the lecture that we are waiting for. We have with us Dr. Savita Devgirkar madam. She is from the BMV College, Nagpur, and she's serving as a professor in the Department of English for the last 23 years. She has a rich experience, students. She's a poet, a reviewer, a writer, and a researcher. She's an erstwhile BOS member, that is the Board of Studies member of Gondwana University and RTMNU, Nagpur University. More than 25 published research papers are to her credit. She is invited as a resource person in the various refresher courses organized by Amravati University and Nagpur University, and also conducts many classes and online sessions for the theory and the literature. I, on behalf of the English department of Sri Binzhani City College, heartily welcome one of my very good friends, Dr. Savita Devkirkar, and request her to take this whole session ahead with American literature with special reference to Robert Frost. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.
My
Am I-
pleasure.
Am I audible to you all?
Yes, you're audible, ma'am. You're visible also.
Okay. At the outset, let me congratulate the office bearers of your study circle. I would like to congratulate the winners of the script writers, because they are into writing and we are into literature. So it's a beautiful amalgamation of all these things coming together today. Another important thing I wish to thank to your head of the department, Dr. Shende sir, as he has rightly set the tone of the lecture by pointing out some of the very brilliant, important, salient features of American literature. So thank you so very much, sir. I would like to thank Nagpur sir as well. कारण की मराठी आमची मातृभाषा आहे आणि मराठी जरी आम्ही शिकवत नसलो तरी मराठी लोक आमच्या फार जिव्हाळ्याचे आहेत. थँक्यू सो व्हेरी मच सर. So let us move on to the topic of today's discussion. Should we? I would like to share my screen to all of you all.
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead. Students, if you have any questions at the end of the session, you're more than, I mean, it is expected that you should ask such questions. I mean, any question which comes to your mind to Devkirkar madam.
This is the topic which is rightly, kept on deliberating by the head of the department, Shende sir, even Pranjali madam also talked about it. And you people might be knowing before I start my lecture to be delivered on this topic, as it is, we are living in the computer world, techno savvy world. So everything comes to you readily available, easily available. Well, I would be talking on American literature with special reference to Robert Frost. That is my topic of today's talk. But when we talk about American literature, I wish to limit my scope not to the American literature, because it is it is rich and a huge field of study and research. That's why I would point out a little correction in the topic, that I would like to talk on American poetry, so that we can have the wonderful references from here and there, which are considered quite important in the development of American poetry, how it came to us today. Okay, so it would be American poetry with special reference to Robert Frost. Well, talking about American literature, as it is known to all of you, Shende sir is also talking about all these things. We people, being the lovers of literature, we know that American literature is a vast and rich array of literature. But when we talk about American literature, this is this incorporates almost all the genres of literature. You can talk about fiction, American fiction. We have non-fiction as well. American poetry is such a vast and rich realm or genre of American literature. Then drama, about American drama, we can have n number of lectures organized on American drama as well. And if we talk about American literature as a whole, we can talk about American literature in two different ways, if I say, because American literature got developed simultaneously when there was, in the 16th century, we had this slavery business took up the chapter in the American history, and that was a black chapter, one can say. But simultaneously, while American literature was into the developing process, there was a development of African American literature as well. So this American literature is not a small topic to be covered in just 40 to 50 minutes. But well, when we talk about American experience, it is well informed by the rich history which I have talked about, history in terms of social history, cultural history, political aspects, ranging from the colonial past till date. Why colonial past? You might be knowing that America was previously the colony of England. As it was the colony of England, that was the same story which we have at the back of our mind when we talk about Indian history. Okay, Indian history is also having colonial past. So American history is also having a colonial past when English people found the new land called as America, and then they settled in the land of America. There were only 13 counties which settled in the land of America. They were the English people, and they started writing. So the previous development of American literature took place in terms of colonial influences, wherein the poets, the writers, the novelists, or the dramatists, they almost all of them talked about the religious things, the Puritan beliefs, because they belong to England, and that's why while migrating from England to America, they carried with them their cultural aspects as well. And one of them was the major aspect of Puritanism, Puritan thought. So these Puritan beliefs used to be there in the production of literature of American people, and that's why they started writing literature in terms of religious facets, and these used to be called as religious literature. You can take the example of Edward Taylor for that matter. You can take the example of Bradstreet and Jonathan Edwards. So these were the poets who started writing, religious poetry. So this was a period at the earliest. It used to be the religious poetry. Then there were several shifts and literary movements that took place. Colonists, they talked about religious literature. Then in the mid of 17th and 18th century, we find that there was an advent of enlightenment that ushered in the issues like discovery, the importance of science and freedom, individuality that took place in the minds and the souls of Americans. Later on, when we talk about 19th century American literature, it flourished with the advent of Romanticism. We need not forget that whichever movements took place, they took place somewhere in France, then it reached to England, and later on it reflected all the aspects of these movements even on the land of America as well. So during 19th century, there was an advent of Romanticism, followed by transcendentalism, realism, and modernism. Now we are into postmodern age. So this is how we started learning and reading American literature as a whole. That was a holistic idea I wanted to tell you, but the main focus of my lecture today, my talk today, is the development of American poetry. So when we talk about the colonial past, which I have already referred, so this was the period of 16th century till 18th century. The themes of faith, God, they dominated the poetic genre. Most of the poets like Anne Bradstreet, then Jonathan Edwards, they talked about the religious and moral concerns in their poetry. Then we find that in the early stages of 19th century, there was an advent of Romanticism, and the focus was shifted from religious poetry to emotions, nature, individualism. These are the salient features of Romanticism, as you have studied in your BA English literature, for that matter. If you remember some of them, so people used to be talking about their self. They were taking you to the open pastures. Nature was their best friend. In that way, Romanticism took place in those times in the early century of 19th. So Phyllis Whitley, for that matter, if I talk about romantic poet, one of the first published African American poet was Phyllis Whitley, and she also talked about romantic features, and she reflected romanticism through her poetry, and that was in the late 18th century, in the early 19th century. Then we talk about some other poets, those who contributed a lot, and we know them. We are familiar with these romantic poets, none other than Edgar Allan Poe, who is an American poet. He also talked about some of the very dark and mysterious themes which were considered as romantic features, or the salient features of romanticism. They used to be melancholic poets. So one of the best examples can be cited here, Edgar Allan Poe, then Henry Longfellow. These poets, they talked about little darker side of human life. They celebrated some of the bleak themes in their poetry. They celebrated American history and folklore as well. Then we come to the transcendental movement in America, which took place in 1830s and around 1830s to 1850s. So self-reliance, individualism, and spiritual connection between human and nature. How a human being can get himself or herself connected to nature through transcendentalism. And we know one of the greatest writers and the poets, Thoreau, which was pointed out by Shende sir as well, Walden as well. I mean, Emerson, Walden, they were the poets who often talked about self-reliance and the importance of nature in the development of a person as a whole. So self was very important, and this self was trying to get reunited with the cosmic energy. That can be called as transcendentalism, which took place in the years in the century, in mid 18th century. Then we talk about American Renaissance, which took place in the mid of 19th century. Most of the times we find that the focus was on individual and democracy, because you know it all that America is called to be the greatest democracy in the world. So most of these poets, they talked about individual as a person, individuality. They celebrated democracy for that matter. The poets like Emily Dickinson, she may be called as an exceptional poet, of course, because when we talk about American Renaissance, the very first and foremost name as a poet, the greatest contributor of American Renaissance is none other than Walt Whitman. His Leaves of Grass is called as the Bible of American Renaissance. But when we talk about the poets like Emily Dickinson, they also she also explored the themes of life, death, and immortality. Some of the poems by Emily Dickinson may have been read by you, or you may read them in the coming future when you would go for the programs like MA in English literature and all. Later on, we step into early 20th century, that is treated to be the modern, modernism. The movement of modernism took place, and the poets like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, they started experimenting with the form and language of the poetry, and explored the themes of disillusionment and fragmentation of post World War, because World War First. Okay, so this poetry, American poetry at the times of modernism, or you may say the modernist poetry, took place in the early 20th century, as soon as they witnessed the First World War. After the First World War, they started experimenting in the form of the language of the poem, and they explored the themes like alienation, barrenness, loneliness. You can take the examples of T.S. Eliot for that matter. When we talk about the Westland, that is the best example one can cite. And T.S. Eliot is known to be the greatest modernist poet of the world. Talking about Ezra Pound, of course, the contribution of Ezra Pound is immense when we talk about modernist movement. But when we talk about Harlem Renaissance, that was a parallel thing, you know. At one side, they were modernist poets, they were writing all these issues in their poetry, they were publishing their poetry, talking about self and disillusionment, the shattering of the American dream for that matter, okay. And then they were concerned about fragmented lives. A man has become an island kind of a thought used to be, you know, frequently visiting their minds, and they tried writing their poetry, which was highlighting disillusionment, which was talking about alienation, which was talking about the futility of this life, as we are, mortal beings. Some of the poets like T.S. Eliot, they found that we have become a wasteland. So, but at the time of this modernist movement, there was a parallel movement going on, and that was African American poets. They were contributing in their own way in the 1920s and 30s. They were celebrating Black culture and the heritage which they brought into the land of America from Africa, South Africa. But the thing is, when they talked about all these things, for example, Langston Hughes, then Claudie Mackay, you know, these poets, they not only talked about Black culture, but they also talked about the elements which we often find in modern poetry. I have already pointed out some of the themes like disillusionment. They also understood that American dream is completely shattered. Like Martin Luther King's great speeches, wherein he talks about the futility of American dream. Simultaneously, parallelly, you know, they were contributing through their poetry what they were facing. They were nowhere. They were, though they were living in such a big democratic country, they had no status as such. And that's why they started celebrating their own culture, Black culture, African American culture. And then you find that these are this a beautiful building of African American literature at one side and American literature at one side. It's a fusion kind of thing which we find through Harlem Renaissance. And then we come to the mid 20th century, which is known to be the confessional, the era of confessional poetry, which is highly personal, emotionally intense poetry. Because if we know, we are talking about the First World War, which is over, the Second World War, which was going on. And that's why people started believing that emotionally, if they are strong, nothing can shatter them. And thus they started writing this confessional poetry in mid 20th century. So it was very intense in terms of emotions, in terms of themes. They often talked about the personal struggles, personal problems, difficulties, hardships, challenges. They often focused in their poetry, in confessional poetry as a genre of American poetry. Offshoot, we may say. And later on, we see that there was a bit generation which took place in 1950s and 60s. That was just, what should I say? It was a kind of revolution against the societal norms. And, they believed in free form of poetry. So the form, the meter of the poem, fixed sonnet should be of 14 lines only. This fixation of all these issues were not considered wholly and solely by this bit generation. They rejected all the societal norms. They embraced spontaneous free form of poetry through their contribution to American poetry. And then we talk about postmodernism and American poetry of today. So when we talk about these people, postmodern poets, particularly talking about, we cannot ignore these African American poets for that matter. We can, for instance, we can quote from Maya Angelou as well. We have one of the greatest poets like Gwendolyn Brooks, they are treated to be the postmodern poets. And now, this is wherein I wanted you people to take a walk to the life and contribution of Robert Frost. As it is known to all of you, within say 60 to 70 years, a span of his life, you find that this man, the greatest poet of the world, you may say, partially romantic poet and partially the modernist poet. Modernist poet, nobody calls Robert Frost as a modernist poet, and I will talk about all these issues, of course, in the coming moments of my lecture. Why he also not treated himself to be the modernist poet, but when we talk about Robert Frost, he is a poet of a common man, because he talks about commonality. He talks about common person. He focuses his protagonists to be a commoner like you and me. So, talking about his literary career, we can say that 4 times he was a Pulitzer Prize winner in poetry. I can name few of them. He won his first Pulitzer Prize for Waste Running Brook in 1928. Then his second Pulitzer Prize took place in 1930, and the name of the book was Further Range. His second Pulitzer Prize was for collected poems, which he got published in the year 1930. Immediately after 1930, we come to the third Pulitzer Prize he won in 1936, and that was for the Further Range. And lastly, when we talk about his fourth Pulitzer Prize, it was for the Witness Tree, which he published in the year 1943. So, 4 times Pulitzer Prize winner in poetry is the greatest contributor, none other than Robert Frost. So he was a firm believer in the values of individualism, order, and human agency. So if we closely see the biographical details of Robert Frost, the literary details of Robert Frost, which he contributed to the world of American poetry, we often say that he believed in, at one side he believed in nature, at other side he believed in science and philosophy as well. So when we talk about Robert Frost, and when we try to talk about his influences, Plato, when he read Plato, he did not agree 100% with Plato, because Plato believed that whatever poetry is written, that is not real. It is just the imitation. Imitation, that's the important word which was used by Plato. Whereas Aristotle in his Poetics says that it's not imitation. It is a personal respite one finds in poetry. So most of the times when we talk about Robert Frost, we believe that he was greatly influenced not by Plato but by Aristotle. So he was a firm believer in individualism, of course. He was a prime figure in reflecting how American literature was shaped through changing times, because he witnessed the kind of political events which took place. First World War was over, second was going on. That was quite reflective in everybody's lives as well. And all of the above, I must say, he was greatly influenced and tortured by the New England's fading landscape. Because when we talk about his age, we know that there was modern thing coming up, industrial revolution was about to take place, and he could see that the beauties of countryside, the beauty of nature, or you may say rustic life, that was fading away. And this factor of fading away of this rustic life made him write such beautiful poetry, what we read today. So he could be called as a first and primemost figure who tried to save New England's landscape. You see, that can be one of the greatest contributions on the part of Robert Frost. So his poetry is known for its timeless and universal themes because he talks about individuals. He talks about you and me. When he writes a poem, he talks about choices which we have to make at every curve, at every turn of our lives. And these choices become very difficult. The road not taken is the best example one can cite here. When we talk about home burial, a poem wherein husband, wife, they do not know what to do with the grief of their only child's death. Because for the husband, it is something different. He takes this grief in a very different way. The mother of a child or the wife of that person has a different attitude towards the grief of the child which she has lost. So his poetry has got universal themes. They are timeless, they are precious, they are, beyond time, I must say, because when we talk about ourselves, we get to connect with these poets who talk about laymen like you and who talk about the commoners like you and me, right? So that is why his poetry has become timeless, I must say. His poetry is firmly rooted in the agrarian New England landscape. I told you why, because those were the times everything was destroyed somehow by world wars. Okay, the beauty of nature was not important for human beings. Now they were into science and technology. They started having revolutions in these fields. They realized that the earth is not round. Okay, enlightenment took place. So in these scenario, when a poet like Robert Frost writes his poetry, he has to talk about individualism. He has to talk about pastures. He has to talk about shepherds. He has to talk about the parents, like home burial parents. That's why his poetry is basically firmly rooted in the rustic life, just like you have witnessed it in the poetry of William Wordsworth, for that matter, right? We have read some of the great poems by William Wordsworth. So that influence of romanticism is also found in Robert Frost's poetry. But Robert Frost had a complex relationship with Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound kept on criticizing Robert Frost because he represented values of individualism. He talked about independence. He talked about agrarian new landscape which was fading away, the countryside people's lives and the values they carry through their lives, a very simple, ordinary life they keep living. These were the themes which attracted Robert Frost, and he gave quite justice to these themes in his poetry. Then his follower, when we talk about the contemporaries of Robert Frost, we often talk about T.S. Eliot, who influenced Robert Frost greatly, and Hemingway as well. So he believed in all these things, but his insights, into all these themes, they are quite marvelous one has to consider. So he is called as a poet of a common man due to all these things. Now, when we talk about the themes of the poetry of Robert Frost, most of the themes I have already stated, but still let me clarify some of other themes. He talks about the deep sense of connection with nature. You can take the example of birches. You can take the example of road not taken. You can take the we can have stopping by woods on a snowy evening. There is a sense of connect with nature when we think about the poetry of Robert Frost. After apple picking, then mowing, for that matter, n number of poems which he has written, he has composed. The rustic pastoral themes are often found coming up frequently on the forefront in the poetry of Robert Frost. The shepherds, they take the center stage in the poetry of Robert Frost. Rural folks you find getting, they are crowded in the poetry of Robert Frost. So some of the poets like Ezra Pound, when Ezra Pound criticized him, calling him, idealized eclogue writer, because Robert Frost was having a great influence over him by Virgil as well. So that may be the sole reason why Ezra Pound criticized the poetry of Robert Frost. So he talks about the loss and love in sheer contrast with each other. They are juxtaposed with each other, and beautiful poetry comes through the pen of Robert Frost. But at the same time, when he talks about nature, when he talks about loss, when he talks about love, he compares this world of beautiful, serene nature with the sophistication and corruption of the city. Okay, so the home burial is the best example one can cite here. Well, he talks about the longing for the past as well in his poetry. And lastly, his poems are pretty symbolic. Symbolic in terms of some things which he wants to say, he does not say, but superficially he simply says some things. For example, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep, from the last stanza from Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. When we talk about this kind of a line or this kind of a stanza, we talk about symbolism. What kind of a symbolism is it replete with in these lines? Human life is full of challenges. At the same time, though there are hardships there, one should not forget the responsibilities we have to render before we sleep. I mean, the day is given for labor and night is for rest. So is with life and death. So life is given to fulfill our responsibilities so that we can die peacefully till the time we go for death. So responsibilities are to be fulfilled before we die. So this is a kind of symbolism we find as one of the major themes in the poetry of Robert Frost. Coming to the next slide, when we talk about the tension between the remnants of the past and the imagination, in our imagination of these things, these are the dramatic motifs you find of pastoral literature, which are described as escape, of course, but they are not. It's always a green thought, according to Robert Frost. Why he talks about this rustic poetry or pastoral poetry, he says, it is maintenance of innocence, achieving or maintaining innocence. Green thought in a green shade. These are the quotes from his own interview with one of the poets, Lewis. A beautiful relationship between mind and nature is dramatized in the poetry of Robert Frost. You can take the example of Tree at My Window. So I have already stated, at one side you have rustic beauty in terms of pastoral greenery and all, and commoners' lives, ordinary people's lives. At the other side, you find that there is a sophisticated urban life. So they are always in clash with each other. When we talk about pastoral thought or the pastoral theme of the poetry of Robert Frost, we often talk about a kind of a realm of play opposing to labor and struggle. So work and play, these are the two different worlds which are clashing with each other in the poetry of Robert Frost. Example can be cited here. Mowing is one of the remarkable sonnets which has been written by Robert Frost. So Robert Frost is a poet who has been called as a sonneteer, He is also called as a dramatic monologue writer, just like your Robert Browning. Okay. He writes in blank verse as well. So he is a multi-dimensional personality if we consider the way he writes his poetry. So, music making, pastoral music making comes through labor, according to the poet, which he reflects in mowing. His poetry draws the readers into the rustic, mysterious, and lost New England. Repeatedly enough, you would find that he is somehow, what should I say? Sorry for the past he has missed. He keeps on thinking. He revisits the past life which he spent in New England, uh, uh, Vermont, for that. Okay, to be very precise, Vermont is missed. New Hampshire is missed in his poetry when he talks about revisiting uh, these cities as mysterious rustic life he misses. So that's the sole reason why Ezra Pound must have criticized him. Well, when we talk about Frost's definition of poetry, you know it very well that most of the poets in the world, they try to, define poetry. For example, the famous definition of a poem by William Wordsworth, I won't go into the depths of all these things because it will take my time and I have a number of things to talk on. Okay. So when Robert Frost tries to define poem, he defines it as a poem is a drama in miniature. Now, why he says so that a poem is a drama in miniature? Because if you read the poems of Robert Frost, you would find that all the characteristics of drama are, reflected through the poetry of Robert Frost. I mean, you can talk about dramatization, characterization. You can talk about some conflict, situational. The poems of almost all the poems of Robert Frost, they give you one situation. They are very colloquial. Ordinary speech is used by Robert Frost. So when he says poem is a drama in miniature, all the characteristics of drama can be witnessed in the poetry of Robert Frost. And that may be the sole reason he says that a poem is a drama in miniature. According to Robert Frost, he also talks about the function of a poem. According to him, he believes that what should be the function, what should be the job of a poem? A poem should give you delight, but it should end in giving you some kind of wisdom, just like your, nighttime stories, just like your fables, Panchatantra, like that. So a poem should begin with delight. It should entertain you. That should be the function of a poem. But at the end of the same poem, the reader must get the chunk of wisdom, how to live life, what is good, what is bad, and the proper choices to be made to get our lives successful. So he often talks about the function of poetry in this way, that poetry must begin in delight and it should end in wisdom. Most of his poems are replete with humor and wit, sometimes terrifying and bleak as well. If we take the example of Home Burial, it is bleak in terms of the theme which has been discussed and talked on by Robert Frost through this blank verse poem, Home Burial. Well, he in one of his books, collected poems, if I'm not wrong, he has also talked about poetry as a thought of his emotions. Okay, and when he talks about poetry as a thought of his emotions, he did not portray himself to be a kind of a moralist here. Believe me, okay, he is not projecting himself to be the moralist, but yes, he is talking about science as another form of poetry. So for Robert Frost, science is nothing but poetry. In fact, if we talk about Robert Frost's poetry, considering poetry as one of the important rich genres, he believes that everything is a poem, just like Shakespeare, Shakespeare, even if he would write a single sentence, it would be very, very, very poetic. So in the same manner, when we consider Robert Frost, he believes that poetry is a thought of his emotions. Now, when we talk about Frost, and when we talk about the sound of poetry, right? Rhythm and meter. That's very interesting about Robert Frost. Rhythm and meter are equally important for Robert Frost. In fact, this is called as sound of sense for Robert Frost. And when we talk about sound in poetry for him as a sound of sense, we believe that sentences have a meaningful tone that precedes the words. You may say that sometimes, an abstract vitality of our speech has got some kind of, meaningful tone. So there is a sound in poetry of Robert Frost. He believes that there is sound in poetry. Whatever you write, okay, it should be said in a meaningful tone. Then only you can get the expected results. And what you want to convey to the readers, that would be conveyed if the tone is meaningful. And this is a kind of, sound of poetry for Robert Frost. So sound of sense and the tone of voice were involved in the context of all the poetry which was written by Robert Frost. In fact, he was more interested into common speech. And when we talk about common speech, we talk about gossips as well, right? In one of the interviews, he has talked about gossips, that he takes gossips in a very serious way, because he believes that we are free while gossiping, and that is exactly the common speech. So he wrote in blank verse narratives, and he ranging from the dramatic monologue to the dialogues with third person narratives as well. The poem like Home Burial is a third person narrative, which we often find. Some of the dramatic narratives can be witnessed through his poems like The Housekeeper, The Mountain. So these are the poems which he wrote in different meter, different form as well. Sometimes he would write sonnets, sometimes he would write dramatic monologues, just like your Robert Browning's My Last Duchess, right? So his variety of skills were observed in sonnets. Most of the skills were observed in sonnets because he experimented in these sonnets. He tried his hands on both types of sonnets, for that matter, Petrarch's sonnet as well as Shakespearean sonnet. Mowing is the best example, but the 15th line is introducing mowing, and that is a curiosity which takes place in the minds of readers. Here you find that he experimented on meter and form of the poem as well. So tones of voice in the context of a strong interest in human intimacy in people and in the colloquial as a source of knowledge. That's why he propagated gossips. I believe that human intimacy is found in gossiping, Colloquialism is found in these kind of tones of voices. And this was the source of inspiration, source of knowledge for the poet. He was the propagator of, I have already said it, ordinary language, and that may be the sole reason he was called as an ordinary, a poet of ordinary people. Okay. So in one of his poems, he has said that metaphor is quite important for his poetry. He finds ample use of metaphors in the hands of Robert Frost, came out excellently throughout his poetry. We find that metaphor is quite important in the poetry of Robert Frost. For Frost, again another definition which he quotes in the books which he got published. Poetry is a metaphor. According to Robert Frost, poetry is a metaphor. Now, when we talk about metaphor, his interest in metaphor and figurative language was quite impressive. Saying one thing at the cost of other. I mean, saying one thing, but you mean to say another thing. That is called as metaphor. It's a direct comparison, of course. So when I say your face is the moon, I am talking about your face not directly, but I am infusing moon over here. So that's what he believed in, figurative language, and thus he started the use of metaphor. Always in every poem, you would find that the poetry of Robert Frost is replete with metaphor. So somehow there was a kind of pleasure of ulteriority, he would find, because his remarkable talk on education by poetry, that's he has published. He delivered this talk, which is known as Education by Poetry, wherein he says, I quote, that it is a kind of 20th century apology for poetry, wherein I use metaphor as the pleasure of ulteriority. A poem provides the pleasure of ulteriority. So one can say that it is nothing but the 20th century apology for poetry. And according to Robert Frost, he believed that every poem is a new metaphor inside. There is a kind of contradiction here, a little of it. Somewhere he says every poem is a new metaphor inside. He talks about the constant symbol. And this metaphor is nothing but the constant symbol. So every poem is a new metaphor inside. But in the in some other book, he says all poems are the same old metaphor always. Now, when he says all poems are the same old metaphor always, what I could understand is that he must be talking about the ultimate reality of human life. And what is that? In celebration of individuals, that must be the same old metaphor. Celebration of emotions, celebration of individuals, that must be his same old metaphor. And that's why you can see the contradictory statements he has made, wherein he says every poem is a new metaphor inside. At the same time, in the next book, he says all poems are the same old metaphor. I am quoting it, the same old metaphor. So he must be talking about the celebration of human life at large. That must be his same old metaphor. Because if we keep reciting the poetry of Robert Frost, we find that metaphors are prevalent in his almost all of his poems. So he contributed to the genre of poetry, that too American poetry, with the kind of use of metaphors in his poetry. So Frost always enjoyed calling himself a synecdochist. He was a synecdochist, according to Robert Frost. He was a storyteller. And when we talk about storytelling, we are talking about the previous, definition of a poem. A poem is a drama in miniature, if you remember that. Okay. So he used to say, I prefer synecdoche in poetry. We use the part for the whole. Okay. We use the part for the whole. So synecdoche is a small thing which we say, but we mean whole thing. That's the love of Robert Frost. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. He has quoted in Mowing, and that has become a celebrated line. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. So if you work and if you play, work and play in contrast with each other, right? If you keep, doing your job seriously, if you keep involving in laborious activities, we find that we are fast asleep after a full day long labor. We are so exhausted that at that point of time we get comfortable, peaceful sleep, and this is the sweetest dream according to Robert Frost. And then he says in the next poem, like birches. Again, I will quote: "Earth, earth is the right place for love," and that is true. Earth is the right place for love. So these are the synecdoche statements which we find popping up in the poetry of Robert Frost. Then there is a potential irony, which is created in the tension between the semantic meaning of a sentence and the tone with which it might be spoken. When we talk about metaphor, when we talk about sense of poetry, we have to understand that there is a semantic meaning which is in struggle with the tone with which it might be spoken. So sarcastically, if we say something that would be pricking too hard, okay, but when we get angry and when we use abusive language, we get irritated, we feel insulted, but we forget immediately. So these are the things which were talked about in his poetry when he talked about the sound of poetry, when he talked about the metaphorical issues or metaphorical images which he has written or created in his poetry, which he has mentioned in his poetry. So metaphor is one of the very important feature in the poetry of Robert Frost. Well, when we talk about modernism, we are talking about some things which the old-fashioned way to be new. I told you, he was not a modernist poet. Robert Frost was not at all the modernist poet, though he was greatly influenced by the modernist writers like poets like T.S. Eliot, the writers like Hemingway, but he was not a modernist. He at the beginning, he criticized modernist poets. In one of the letters to his daughter Leslie, he wrote a critique on modernism, which is not published. It was the letter which we wrote to her, to his daughter, wherein he criticized modernism. According to Robert Frost, modernism overvalued imagism over the play of rhythm and meter. So rhythm and meter was compromised just for the sake of imagism to be infused in the poetry of modernist poets. That was the first criticism which he has mentioned very clearly in the letter to his daughter Leslie. Secondly, he criticizes modernism as having, modernist poets, they are having the fascination with fractured forms and fragments sacrificed in the inner form, sacrificing the inner form and organic integrity of a poem. So a poem is basically having organic integrity, it has inner form as well. But modernist poets, talking about, modernist poets, they believe in free verse and all, but on what basis they support free verse and all? They propagate free verse, or they propagate modernist way of writing in terms of fragmentation, which fractures the form actually. They write fragments, and this is not a proper thing because it disturbs the overall integrity of a poem. So there is an inner form, okay, and an organic integrity which is expected of in a poem. That this gets disturbed when we talk about modernist poets. So that was a second very, very what should I say? Strict and harsh criticism by Robert Frost on the modernist poetry. Then thirdly, he says mostly the emphasis is on images without creating any connections amongst them. So the poetry of modernist poets is mostly um, filled with, crowded with n number of images, and all these images have nothing to do with each other. There is no connection with each other. So that's the third important criticism against modernist poets, according to Robert Frost. Fourthly, he says modernist poets, they believed in self-referential games. They talked about allusions, and these modernists, they were doing all these things just to create allusions. That was the important critique of modern poetry. He wrote to his daughter through the letter. I mean, he never published any critique on modernism, though he proclaimed. But if we go through this criticism, or if we read this critique of modernism by Robert Frost, we believe that he must be against modernist poets or the modernist movement. But then we realize that after few years, he himself proclaimed, Robert Frost proclaimed that the old-fashioned way to be new is nothing but the modernist poetry. So what is modernist poetry? According to Robert Frost, it is the old-fashioned way to be new. I mean, old things are, which we often say, old wine in a new bottle. Okay. In the same manner, after a few years, he realized that poetry is to be what is the major function of a poem? A poem is to reach out to the masses. And if it is so, if this is the function of a poem, that it should reach out to the masses, to the greater crowd, one has to accept what is prevalent in that particular age. That may be the sole reason why he accepted modernism in later years of his poetry, because he believes that it was a kind of ambivalent approach on the part of Robert Frost. So he believes that it should be made new, make it new. If you want to be a modernist poet, make it new. That was how he started working upon modernist poetry in the later years of his literary career. And if we talk about the influences in the life of Robert Frost, I have talked about T.S. Eliot in a cursory reference, though. For T.S. Eliot, poetry is an escape from personality. But though T.S. Eliot is the great influence on Robert Frost, or he is treated to be the great influence, one of the influences on Robert Frost's life, we have to believe that he was not, one with T.S. Eliot in most of the points, or he has contradictory views and opinions as well. It was not like whatever was said by T.S. Eliot was accepted wholeheartedly by Robert Frost. That cannot be called as an influence. Influence makes you understand, makes you see the reality better. Okay, that can be called as the contribution of some greater poet. So, according to T.S. Eliot, when we talk about his definition of a poem, T.S. Eliot says poetry is an escape from personality. So, one should not talk about personality according to T.S. Eliot. It should be an escape from personality. But for Frost, it was not like that. For Frost, it was poetry of emotions. It is a thought of his emotions. For Frost, it is a thought, a poem is a thought of his emotions. So when we talk about escape from personality, it is just opposite to Frost's beliefs in emotions. So it is a thought of his emotions. He did not portray himself to be in any way, modernist, of course. But then we have this kind of observation when we go through the life of Robert Frost. Well, I have considered one of the very important, poems for you all to be discussed, right? Should I share one poem with you all?
Sure, ma'am. Can we, we have 5 minutes more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was about to talk on all these salient features in the poetry of Robert Frost. And when we talk about all these issues, metaphor for that matter, and then sound of poetry, when we talk about symbolism, when we talk about the sheer contrast which he makes through his poetry, one side there is a beauty of rustic life, serenity, green pastures, shepherds, ordinary people, and they are in sheer contrast with the sophistication of urban life. I wanted the students to understand one poem which is having all these characteristics. Mending Wall, for instance, which is a known poem by Robert Frost. Mending Wall. There is a contrast, sheer contrast, which is not taken side by Robert Frost. He doesn't take the side of something there is that doesn't love a wall. When he is talking about nature, formlessness. There is no form. When we talk about nature, flora and fauna, it's not human nature, flora and fauna, it is pure, utter purity, in whatever way it has been given to us, that is formless. Whereas there is an order to avoid this chaos. There is an order when the neighborer says, good fences make good neighbors. When he says good fences make good neighbors, and when there is a narrator saying that something there is that doesn't love a wall, it is contrast. But the poet is not taking sides anyway, okay? Because he tells, he believes this wall to be, membrane, umbilical cord between the neighborer and a narrator. This is a cord. It will separate the narrator from this neighborer, but this membrane will get them repaired, to repair the wall, right? So these are sheer beauty in
that's punning on words and very beautifully done by you.
It's a beauty of the poetry of Robert Frost. You just get lost. So when we talk about birches, work and play, the innocence is reflected through the child at play. He's swinging on the branches, And when we look at the ideas or the thoughts of the adults, they look at this boy and they just want to, escape from the hardships of human life. So this is, I can keep going. But then
I know. A passionate lover of literature will never stop deliberating on all these things. And very rightly highlighted by you that poetry, it begins in delight and it has to end in wisdom. Otherwise, what is the purpose of poetry then? To formally propose a vote of thanks, let me invite one of my colleagues, Ms. Amrapali Modak. Over to you, ma'am. Just a second.
Good afternoon, everyone. Two roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
These lines remind us that the choices we made in life can shape our journey in the most remarkable ways. Respected principal of the college, Dr. Sujit Mehtre, the guest of today's inaugural function, Dr. Savita Devgirkar, the head of the Department of English, Dr. Anil Shende, Associate Professor of English, Dr. Pranjali Kane, Dr. Rajendra Naikpade, NSS Coordinator, and the faculty of the Department of Marathi, the faculty of the Department of English, and dear students. On behalf of the Department of English of Sri Binsani City College, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you who have joined us today for the inaugural function of English Literary Association. I spread my most sincere thanks to the chief guest, Dr. Savita Devgirkar, for her enlightening lecture on American literature with a special reference to Robert Frost. Her insights and knowledge have undoubtedly enriched our understanding of this literary field. Ma'am, you truly made this event beautiful and informative for us. Once again, I thank you, ma'am. I thank to the principal of the college, Dr. Sujit Mehtre, for his support. I thank to the head of the Department of English, Dr. Anil Shende, for his support. I thank to the organizing team, Dr. Pranjali Kane, Mrs. Harsha Shende, for having such a wonderful session. I thank to all the participants for attending this program peacefully. I extend my sincere gratitude to the students who have been selected for the positions of secretary, members, and office bearers of English Literary Association. I thank to those who directly or indirectly help us for making this event a huge success. As we have moved forward, let us carry with the inspiration ignited by Dr. Robert Frost words, the poet Robert Frost words, and the knowledge gained from this event. Like the poet, let's embrace the less traveled path of literary exploration and continue to make all the difference in our academic pursuits. Thank you once again. Thank you, ma'am. Here I declare the program is over. Thank you.